Are you a yoga teacher? If you're listening to this, then there's a good chance that you are. And I'm curious, are you making a living at it? I know that's a taboo question to ask, but it's an important question to ask. And if you're not making a living at it, do you want to? And what are the barriers to that? Well, these are like really hard questions. And I just got off of my weekly teachers class and we were discussing it. A group of people just like yourself, mostly podcast listeners, yoga teachers, we were just hashing it out. You know, where do we see things working? Where do we not? How much do teachers make? If you're interested in that kind of thing and you want to have some other teachers to talk to about it, you can get in on it by joining my weekly teachers class. And if it's something that you've been considering, let me mention that the introductory rate is going to expire at the end of the month. Everybody who subscribes before the end of the month will get to keep that introductory rate indefinitely, but it is going to go up a little bit on November 1st. It's still ridiculously low priced, but if you want to give it a try, you can lock in the introductory rate by subscribing by the end of the month. What's happening there is quite exciting, and I encourage you to check it out. It's the Jay Brown Yoga Weekly Teachers Class. You can find it at jbrownyoga.com. Wow. What do you think? You think this is going to happen this week, my friends? I'm not so sure. This is Jay Brown Yoga Talks podcast. My name is Jay Brown. How are you doing? Often when I hit record, I have this image in my mind of my voice traveling out across the asynchronous void and landing somewhere along the time-space continuum, which is wherever you are right now. It's kind of a magical thought in the best possible way. And frankly, I've been doing this podcast for over 3 years. And without a doubt, this podcast intro has been the most difficult to make happen yet. Usually, I just hit record and it comes right out, it rolls right out. Sometimes I get it in one take. Every once in a while, I got to do another take or two because I'm not happy with one part or something. But I've been at this for like 30 or 40 minutes now. I'm at like take 40 or something. It's unbelievable. It's never been like this. And I'm just praying right now that this is actually going to be a take that I can use, because I've got an incredible podcast this week with Shelly Prosko that I want you to get to listen to. I think the reason why I'm having such a rough time of it is that I'm spent. My wife got called out of town unexpectedly, and I had to be on solo parent duty for 3 days leading up to a yoga teacher training intensive that I'm doing a module in. So I, do the heavy hours. She always seems to get that gig at the worst possible time, but it's not like I can say, no, don't take the gig, even though we need the money, because I need to have more time to reflect and put myself in the right headspace so I can be effective at my job. I can't say that shit to my wife. So I toughed it out. And I have said this before, but I would like to say it again. If anyone listening to this is a single parent, big props to you. My heart and respect to any single parents out there. Man, even just doing it for 3-4 days, it's rough. But we got to do what we got to do, right? And I got to make this happen, because I know there are like a lot of you out there who are listening. I got this email that I wanted to read to you. It kind of goes to this idea of wherever you are as you're listening to this now. It says, "Hey Jay, recently I heard you share an email you received from an avid listener of the podcast, and it struck me that you too are a real person sharing a lot of yourself with an unknown audience. And I just wanted to say how much I also appreciate listening. I'm currently finishing my first season working on an organic vegetable farm in Palmer, Alaska. 2 to 3 times a week, I head into town in the evening to teach yoga at a small studio there. So much of what you share on your podcast resonates with me, especially with the idea of bringing yoga back underground. Here, we are literally underground, hidden away in a basement. I have struggled to find my voice as a teacher and feel like I'm first finding my footing. Many of the topics you discuss on the podcast feed my mind and affirm many thoughts I have had while working out in the field during the day. So I just want you to know that somewhere in Alaska, you have farmers listening to your podcast, appreciating each and every one of your talks like a unique building block to this community so many try to place under the one blanket called yoga. I feel more informed, inspired, and eager to follow in the footsteps of teachers like yourself who are committed to sharing yoga in a way that is honest and healing. How sweet it would be to connect in real time one day. Until then, I look forward to tuning in. Sydney. How cool is that, Sydney? Are you like out in the field right now while you're listening to this? Oh, I just love the idea of that. You're like farming right now in Alaska. So cool. Thanks for writing, Sydney. I don't know, that is what motivates me at the end of a ridiculously long week when I have no energy left after 40 minutes of struggling to still carry forth to do this and make this happen, because I know that there's lots of us out there who are like, just getting through our weeks, and sometimes having something that acts as a vehicle for you to reflect and have time is invaluable. So thank you, Sydney. And to everybody else out there, if you're listening and you're ever inspired, I always enjoy getting emails from you. It's really the boon of doing the podcast are these kinds of connections that get made. And gosh, it would be cool to meet you sometime, Sydney. Maybe that will happen. All right, let's get to the podcast. I'm talking with Shelly Prosko. We've been friends for some time. She was on the podcast maybe 2 years ago, and she is someone I know who walks the line of like science and yoga in a way that I feel very comfortable with. She's somebody who does a wonderful job of bringing me to a certain place that I like to be. And I've had this conversation with her after I had my conversation with Lauren Fishman and Carrie Owerko from last week, and I was still kind of working through stuff, this question of yoga therapy and yoga and this idea about right alignment. So I really needed somebody to hash it out with that I would feel comfortable to just be totally uncensored, and Shelly was the perfect person. We really get into it in a very sincere way, to the heart of some of these questions. Very excited for you to get to hear it today. Before we do, I'm betting that there's a lot of you out there who conduct teacher training programs. Maybe you have a center and you have your own teacher training program. Maybe you teach in a teacher training program. And maybe you struggle with this 20 hours of yoga anatomy that you're supposed to provide, especially since if you've been listening to the podcast, the ideas around yoga anatomy and alignment are really an evolving thing. And sometimes it's hard to find a quality source for this material. Well, it just so happens that today's sponsor, yogaanatomy.net, has a perfect solution for that. If you're not familiar with yogaanatomy.net, it's the online education resource of Leslie Kaminoff and Amy Matthews. And they have a 20 hours yoga anatomy fundamentals course that you can plug right into your teacher trainings. It's what I use for my teacher training, and they provide, in my opinion, the best source for yoga anatomy study. And you can find it at yogaanatomy.net. Okay, last thing. If you are listening and you are like my friend Sydney in Alaska and have interest in meeting me in person, I would surely love that. You can find me in East Hartford, Connecticut, October 20th, Fishkill, New York, November 3rd, and Auckland, New Zealand, November 24th and 25th. You can find out about those gigs and more, and find all of my stuff at jbrownyoga.com. All right, y'all. I'm going to touch base with you on the other side, let you know who's coming on next week as usual. But how about that? I think this is going to be it. It wasn't easy, but we made it. Let's listen to this talk that I had with Shelly Prosko. Hi.
Thank you for this. This is great.
Oh, it's really good to talk to you. I've been looking forward to it. And, this is timed out kind of perfectly because, you reached out to me after I wrote that blog post a couple weeks back about alignment. And since then, though, I also put out a podcast with Gary Kraftsow and a bunch of other yoga therapy kind of folks. And it spurred all kinds of conversations about, the difference between yoga and yoga therapy again, which is what you and I talked about, I think over a year ago.
Yeah, I think it's been 2 years, actually.
Wow. Gosh.
Yeah, time goes by fast.
Just keeps racing on us. Well, in any case, the reason I'm so excited to talk to you is that in all these years that I've been doing this, I've talked to a bunch of different people, about yoga and yoga therapy. And you're one of the people who I feel like is science-y in a certain way, or evidence-based, if you want to call it that. But you retain a little special spark of something. And I don't know how to describe what that special spark is exactly. But there's this fine line that gets walked when we look at yoga through a scientific lens. And sometimes when I talk to some people, it goes the other direction and I feel like I lose the spark. But with you, I don't. And so I need to have some conversation with you today to just see if we can ride this line between science and yoga in a way that feels, I don't know, I guess just better to me.
Yeah, no, I hear you. I mean, that's what I've been struggling with. I don't know if struggle is the right word, but that's just what I've been working with for 20 years, right? Trying to find that mix, that combination. And thank you for those words. That that means a lot to me, because that's what I try to do. That's what I really want to do, is combine, yes, the evidence base as much as we can in the science, and also, don't lose the spirit, the art of yoga, and the art of what I do, as a physiotherapist too. There's definitely an art there. So thank you for acknowledging that. That, I cannot tell you how much that means to me. I mean, I can only wish, to be described that way. So thanks, Jay.
Well, you're very welcome. And I think the other part of it for me is also, even when I spoke to someone like you or Neil Pearson, he's a perfect example. Someone who is more rooted in, physiology, physiotherapy in a way that I'm not. But there's still I don't know how to say it. I want to say a reverence for the mystery of the body or something like that. I think where I've been getting into a debate with people is when I feel like there's this idea that someone is going to have some special knowledge that will know how to heal another person or something.
Right.
I think it's a good idea. I think a person can educate themselves about the structure of their hip bones, and that can be a really helpful thing in understanding how to make good choices for yourself in practice so that it works for you. But I don't know that yoga teachers learning about the structure of people's hip bones or ideas about what hip bones are, that means that they somehow have some special knowledge where they're going to know the right poses for people or the right sequences for people in order to heal them.
Right. And that's where, we get into the conversation surrounding what is proper alignment or proper movement, and is there such thing as, good and bad, and making blanket and global recommendations and things like that. But, really good science, if you want to just even stick to the science, really good science is asking more questions. Science is made to have us, just be more and more less wrong, progress towards being less wrong and asking more questions. And science gives us a way to ask even better questions. And we have to be really comfortable with that uncertainty, I think. And that's good science. So it's not that we have to, even just say, like, I think in black and white quite a bit, actually, and I try not to. That's one thing I've been working on, with myself, to try to be just a little more like yes and approach. But, it doesn't have to be necessarily where there's this black and white where, okay, we have the science, and then, there's the art and the mystery, and it's black and white. Do you know what I mean? Like, I think they are one and the same. And if you go, and I'm not like a researcher, like a scientist per se. I enjoy science. I want to learn more about it. But, what gets me going is when I listen to really amazing scientists. And I've been doing that more recently, the last few years, like going to big medical conferences and being in touch with some of the great researchers. And when you get talking to them, they're spiritual, mystic, artistic beings, in my opinion, like a good scientist. Think of Einstein, So, like, I think it's all one and the same. I can't quite articulate it, but, I'm trying not to think black and white. I'm trying to be more yes and.
Well, it's funny, but both when I had Neil on and Matthew Taylor on, and, like, we got to talking about, like, science, it always ended up in this very mystical place.
Yeah.
I was like, to me, it is very mystical. It can be. But the email that you sent me after the blog post I wrote, it was basically sort of saying that you appreciated me raising questions about this idea of there being one right alignment. And then you said that you were worried potentially that the yoga therapy world moves in a way in that direction when it's like focusing on alignment continuing ed courses. This idea being that to get smarter about yoga, to become more therapeutic about yoga, is about learning proper alignment. And that really scares me, because I just don't think that's how you become better yoga therapists. I don't think it's about proper alignment, or
me too.
One right alignment at least.
Yeah, and that I do have a concern, and I don't know if worry is the right word, but I'm concerned. I want to definitely do what I can. Part of my mission is just to help educate, and myself, of course, and others. And I think what is a concern is basically what you just said. But I think there's danger in any practitioner, not just a yoga therapist, but any healthcare practitioner or yoga teacher, movement specialist, strength conditioning coach, fitness professional, etc. I think there's a danger in us believing that if we study biomechanics more and if we look deeper into alignment and posture, that we will then be creating more safe yoga. And I think that's dangerous, because then we stop thinking of all the other factors that play into pain and injury, and it's just not looking at the whole person. We're regressing back to that postural-structural biomechanical model, or that kinesiopathological model that I've been trying to get me and many thousands of physical therapists have been trying to get away from. I mean, I've been doing this for over 20 years, and our profession, our physical therapy profession, is pockets of it. We're getting better. We're actually diving deeper into the biomechanics research to show that a lot of what we were taught in the 90s is, that's not accurate. We know more now, and it's slowly transitioning in our profession, but there's a lot of friction, and of course, right? Because there's a lot of continuing education in our own profession that is based on, the older models, the postural structural biomechanical, and not really coming into the biopsychosocial biopsychosocial-spiritual model. But myself and many of my colleagues, like you've already mentioned two of them, Matt and Neil, and there's a whole bunch of us bridge builders who are physiotherapists or rehab professionals that are trying to integrate yoga, which provides this amazing framework for using a more biopsychosocial spiritual model. So we're working so hard, right, to try to come away from, and the science, just wait, Jay, the science is showing us.
Before we get to the changing science, because I want to get to the changing pain science, but I want to go back to something else that you just said, because I think it's profoundly significant that within the world of physical therapy, people think of physical therapy as this like done deal, like it's got figured out or something, because what you just said is that the understanding of what physical therapy does for someone and whether or not it even works and how to educate someone how to do it has changed since the 90s. It's not like it's changed since the 40s or 50s. It's changed since the 90s in the last 10, 20 years.
20 years. It's 2018. So the 90s was 18 years ago.
Oh my God. See? I said 10 to 20 years.
I know.
10 to 20 years.
I'm teasing.
It's more than 20 years, but the point is that
but it has changed in the last 10 years even.
Yeah.
So like there's that too. Yeah, it has changed. Yeah. The paradigms are shifting. So what I was saying is that we're working hard, and then I see, and this is part of my email, when I had said to you, I do start to see, yoga and yoga therapy books and webinars and, courses and that are, I don't know where it's coming from, but it's falling back into, those are some of the things that we were taught in the 90s, like, ergonomics and alignment and posture and SI joint and shearing and all these different things. And it makes me, I don't know how I feel about it. I guess just, not sad, just like, okay, like we've got work to do on, all areas. But yoga, if I can just say one more thing on that, I guess what does sort of disenchant me or dishearten me a little bit is that yoga was part of how it saved me. But I mean, it's been such an important part of me in my personal life and my professional life, to bring this more biopsychosocial spiritual approach and actually shed more light on what really, really good science is. Like yoga's been a part of that. And so to see, maybe and it's not all yoga and yoga therapy, but just to see little pockets of where that might be going to this more postural, structural, biomechanical approach and being more attached to that in order to make yoga more safe. Mm-hmm. There's more to it than that. And let me just say this before people start going crazy. Also, by the posture, and this is what I want to talk about too. I want to give you my perspective. Mm-hmm. Posture and alignment and structure is still absolutely important.
Yes.
So
we're going to get to where alignment is important, because I agree with you. I agree with you there.
When does biomechanics matter? Yeah.
But what's funny is, I don't know if it's funny, but there's another episode that I've recorded that we'll post before this one with Dr. Lauren Fishman, who is awesome. He's great. I so enjoyed him, and he's such an important figure. He's done important work. He also put out a new website recently called Yoga Injury Prevention website. And it is all based on the idea of alignment being the thing that prevents the injury, along with some other ideas about, using props and stuff. But I don't know, we had a little bit of friendly debate about it. But he's very old school. He studied with Mr. Iyengar back in the day. And it just seems like it's too easy an answer to just say, oh, if you put the knee over the ankle, it's safer. Because that's not really accurate.
Well, and I think what we can do, if we want, is we look even deeper into what the biomechanic research, is telling us. And so basically this kinesiopathological model, right, it's really suggesting that there is an ideal way, a safe way for the body to move. And if we move out of those patterns, that may increase our risk of joint and tissue damage, that can lead to more pain and wear and tear. That's what many of us are taught. That's what I was taught. And we don't throw this out completely, but when you look at what some of the research is saying, some of it's quite high level research. It's interesting. And so we look at things like faulty movement patterns, like what you were just saying, the knees over the toes, or the knee valgus position where, where the knees fall inwards, that, yeah. Scapular dyskinesis. Have you heard of that term? So like your scapula is not moving, your shoulder blade's not moving properly. Like in school, we took all about scapulohumeral rhythm. And if that doesn't happen, then you get impingement and things like that. There's lumbar flexion. That's a big one. So lumbar or back spinal flexion. If we do that too much, that's going to cause
no spinal flexion.
Yeah.
No
right.
spinal
So
flexion.
Neutral, So hinge at the hip and the knees, and so I was taught all of that. But you start looking deeper into the research over the last 20 years and more. So we start to find that it gets tricky. Our bodies are actually, our tissues are meant to adapt. Now, if we overload too much, then they'll fail to adapt, and that's when we can get injury or pain and things like that. But what some of the studies will show is, so for example, you'll have randomized controlled trials, you'll have systematic reviews where they take all these studies, and you may find that you have a control group, you've got people that, let's say, let me just think of an example, knee pain, patellofemoral syndrome. So you may have a control group, you have a group of people that have knee pain where you just do strengthening exercises. You're not working, trying to change the tracking of the knee. You're not trying to change, the neuromotor control or anything like that, or the kinematics. Just plain old, strengthening. Yeah. And then the next group with knee pain, then you have, okay, let's pay attention now to alignment. Right, and see what happens there. And what they're showing, and not just with knee, but with the shoulder and different joints and different things, that both groups get better. Okay, so that's interesting. Yeah. Like, we can't make conclusions from that, but it's interesting. But it may show us, okay, there may be more reasons then why people are getting better. Right. The other thing is, when you actually look at the group where we were trying to change the tracking of the knee, and they measure, and they have fancy measurements, especially in the shoulder. There's some really good research there with, if anyone's interested, McQuaid and Borstad do a lot of really good stuff with the shoulder. And the intention is to change the scapulohumeral rhythm, and they do all these different procedures like manual cueing and even hands-on manual assist to change the scapular kinematics. But what they've showed in the study, so those people got better, their pain improved. But when they did all the EMGs and all the fancy tests that they do for the kinematics didn't change. So we try to, change the kinematics, but they didn't even change. And
they still felt better. They still felt better.
Oh, yeah, absolutely, yeah. So then that leads to more research, right? And it just leads to more and more and more. Now, again, that doesn't, we can't leave this conversation, though, and just put a blanket statement on that. So,
right, there's some things that can be measured with science, clearly, like you're describing. And we can see that there are exceptions to some of these rules. That's all we're saying. Like, there's these rules about don't have spinal flexion or you're going to hurt your spine. That can be shown to not always be true. There are certainly instances where it is true, where it is warranted to keep extension when you bend forward so that you got some injury or something and you need to protect or whatever. There's a reason why that might be a good idea, but it's not like there's one. See, that's the thing. You said it earlier, like there's this proper or right way, this ideal way that you're supposed to move. And if you're not moving that way, then you're hurting. And we have to learn it. You have to learn the right way to move. And then there's going to be these special people who can teach you that. Right. And that's just, and in my opinion, that's, when we look at ahimsa, we're supposed to be nonviolent and non-harming and kind. And when you're giving information out that our body is weak and needs to be protected, and the spine isn't supposed to be, flexed, and we need to be in neutral, and you're really setting up expectations that we have this weak and fragile
body. And you look at the work of Pete O'Sullivan, a spinal researcher, Greg Lehman. You should get him on your show. He's a physical therapist, chiropractor, a spinal researcher, clinician. He has a course reconciling biomechanics with pain science, and he actually teaches for Jules Mitchell's yoga teacher training. So he might be interested in coming on. I can give you some links in his work.
I've heard his name, but I don't know a lot about him.
Yeah, so. He would be just phenomenal, to talk about this topic. But I lost my train of thought where I was going.
Well, no, I have it, because what you were saying was where I kind of wanted to go. That, like, some of what we're saying is that the science is all good. Like, I'm all for research. I'm all for evidence and science. But I think sometimes what happens is, what you were pointing to, is that this kind of allopathic model, or I don't know, however you try to, you called it a kinesiopathological model. It's a pathological model. Our spines and our whole bodies are robust, and they're meant to be resilient. Right. And we adapt to load. So we can put the knee in valgus. You can do all kinds of things, and our bodies can adapt to that. Now, again, if we're doing it, there are certain cases. If we're under heavy loads, or if you are jumping off off something and you're landing, so high forces, there may be those times where a certain alignment may be better. But for low loads, like in just everyday activities, or even a yoga practice, just bending, squatting, bending forward, spinal flexion, our bodies are meant to move in all these different directions. Now, if you have pain, like you were saying earlier, with this, if you're forward flexing and you really bend, you flex the spine, and there's pain there, well, that means you're sensitized to that, that movement. And absolutely, we need to change it. Or you're in pigeon pose, and your hip is hurting.
It doesn't
mean just keep going into it. It doesn't mean opening,
Well, no, because if you've got that pain, that's a sign. Your body is giving you a signal that you are approaching the tissue's ability to adapt to that load. Do you get that?
I do.
That's what your body's trying to maybe suggest is, and so I have a whole different perspective on what safe yoga is, and how yoga teachers can help cultivate safety in a classroom. Me too.
Yeah, what I think, and where I think we might be in agreement on this, is that, this model that you were talking about, that you were calling, that I still can't get the name right, the kinesthesio-pathological model.
Just call it KPM.
KPM, the KPM, thanks. I'll remember that. The KPM, to me, essentially, you called it a model. It's a set of ideas about the body. And I had the great pleasure of studying with Amy Matthews, and she taught this thing that really proved to be true to me, is that, like, the idea that you have your body, it changes your body. So the idea that our bodies are like that, and that we have to keep them extended and hinged from the hips, or we're going to break them, that creates a whole spiral effect in our system.
Absolutely.
That I think goes contrary to what I've observed in terms of how yoga has healed me. And that's why we started today. That line that we're walking is that's where it veers into this place where it's no longer, it's somebody, like, we're machines that are broken. Like you said that earlier, like, we're broken, and over time our bodies break down. We have to fix them like cars or something like that.
And that's how the using yoga has helped me and so many of my colleagues so much in our physical therapy practice, because I don't see myself anymore as someone who fixes someone. I empower people. I facilitate their recovery. The model is more of this whole person, patient value, patient-centered sort of care, where the person, essentially, we're empowering them and just facilitating their own internal environment to heal. And that model, if you're looking at that kinesiopathological model as well, like like you said, it's a set of ideas and it's a model, and no models are are perfect and all models have flaws, and they can be very useful. And so it doesn't mean that model doesn't work. I mean, I've got lots of colleagues that use that model and they're getting people better.
Right.
So who cares? So the other, some people will say, well, who cares? Why are we spending so much time talking about this? And,
well, we're spending some time because sometimes that model is talked about as an objective truth. And then they want to use that as the basis for what yoga therapy is going to be or something.
That's right. And that's where I think we get into some problems. And that's where I'm disheartened, if I can see some little pockets of yoga and that yoga therapy going towards a little bit more that model. And if we look at yoga and the philosophy of yoga, I mean, we aren't doing something to someone, and we can look at that as violent as well, right?
Yes.
As doing something to someone. We need to allow, and you just have to look at the philosophy really, and it guides us so nicely. So,
well, let's talk a little bit then more about what you think is the yoga. This is the hardest thing to ever talk about, which is, what is that part of yoga? Like you just referred to when you look at yoga philosophy, you said that because you were drawing upon another source other than the KPM model. And that other source, that's not the KPM model, that is the yoga source. That's where we get into the gray, murky areas. Like Gary has a very specific, lineage, tradition, and set of teachings that he's pointing to and saying that is yoga therapy. But there's a lot of other people defining it differently. And the part that's the yoga, and when it goes from being a yoga teacher to a yoga therapist, is where it's not clear to me.
Right. Yeah. You're still there. You've been pretty unclear for a few years.
I know. Well, I mean, sometimes
I think we
recently,
all are. I think
recently,
there's no answer.
Well, thanks for saying that, because there isn't an answer. But people,
that's, as humans, we always want that's the black and white thinking, and that's what I'm trying to get away from.
That's right. But
I'm learning more about the yes and.
Yes.
And yes. It's okay it's okay not to know. I think there's a lot of overlap.
Yeah.
So there's lots of overlap, and you've had everybody on your show, like Matthew and Gary, and I think you've had Michael Lee. I remember that. That was a great talk. He was talking about yoga therapy. Who you've had some other people, but you've had, the best of the best. That's such
some smart people on.
But you've knowledgeable. You've had the really knowledgeable people that really know what they're talking about, that have been in the yoga therapy world since its inception. And since we still can't figure it out, maybe that's a sign. Maybe that's telling you something.
Yeah.
And maybe there's nothing to figure out. And here's one thing that I've learned. If you just let me indulge in this for a second.
Please.
I've learned that when I'm really stuck and I'm trying to find that answer, that's my black and white thinking. I like to look at, okay, so there's these two things I'm trying to differentiate between them. And maybe we're asking the wrong question. Like, what's the difference between yoga and yoga therapy? Maybe the question needs to be, well, how are they the same?
Mm-hmm.
What are the commonalities? What's the end intention, mission, if you will? You look at the definition of yoga therapy, which I know you repeat.
Yes, I'm not going to read it again. But it sounds like yoga to me.
Yeah. Well, how about we just so it's the same. And you know what? Parts of my physical therapy profession, that's what we do too. So instead of spending time searching and debating and trying to find, well, how is that different? Well, let's all have the same definition, and there's different paths, there's different ways to get there in different contexts.
Well, let me jump in for a second, because I think I could potentially speak to that as like a devil's advocate some, because I'm in agreement. I think that's a great idea. But I know for some people, and this is what Matthew said, and I believe Larry Payne too, but it makes sense that if you're trying to get research grant money, that you need to present what you're doing in a way that feels credible to the people who provide those resources. So there's a reason to, I don't know, have there be a yoga therapy category when it comes to clinical research and stuff. I think that's right. But I don't think that also means that yoga therapy means science. Because like what you said, it is yoga. and what makes yoga work when it gets codified, or that's what people want to do, because in order to kind of quantify it and have an objective metric for what makes you good at it, you need to be able to kind of measure it in some way, and that's why KPM is like a perfect answer. But if we do that, then I'm kind of with you that we move away from this inquiry place. And that's where I think it's very exciting, and that's where like the kind of the transformations happen. That's what actually makes the techniques work in my experience. Is there's something subtle that's definitely not KPM that makes it work. And what that subtle thing is enigmatic, because it's entirely personal and like expresses differently for different people based on who they are and how they express it. So how do you codify that? I don't know. I mean, I like what you're saying, that we could have like there not be this question of what makes us different, but what makes us the same. But the whole idea was to make yoga therapy like its own separate profession, wasn't it?
Yeah, and I think what you just said there, my mind literally went off in about 6 different huge directions. So let me just calm down and get a little bit grounded. So I think I want to go back to what I had said, because I don't want to be I don't want people to misinterpret what I say, or you to misinterpret what I'm saying about finding the similarities. I still can see the purpose and intent of yoga therapy and value what that area is trying to do, and respect it and agree with it actually and what they're trying to do. And I think it is important to see that they are 2 different paths. Like, so it's all yoga, and yoga therapy is like this subset, and it's a different skill set. And I think that's very true. What I'm just saying is to, when you're asking the questions, like for the last several years on, how are they different? And you just can't quite wrap your head around the difference. The 2 things I would say to that is, like I said, one is, well, maybe just change the way you're thinking. And it's like, okay, well, they have similar goals, which is to, help people progress towards better health and well-being, which that's what we're all trying to do. But the paths are very different. And just acknowledging that the skill set of some yoga professionals, whether it's a yoga therapist through IOAT, whether it's a yoga therapist through different types of, training or learning, or a healthcare professional that's, been learning and practicing yoga for a few decades, and they're using yoga. And so whatever path, there's many different paths, just acknowledging that there's a difference between there's a different skill set, how someone uses yoga for an individual person. Like there's more training on what that person presents as far as, their dosha intake, guna, maybe they're more tamasic, and there's certain poses and sequences that you wouldn't maybe use for that, different breath, mantras. Through a thorough narrative review with them, which is part of the therapy, assessment, you find out that, they've got some trauma in certain positions. So, maybe you wouldn't do that certain breath pattern in that position, or it's, I know, but okay, I have to stop you, because you just went where everybody I've been talking to this week has gone. This idea that yoga therapy is this subset or a separate skill set from teaching yoga. And You're stuck on that.
No, yeah. Not that I'm stuck on that. I just see contradictions in that, because you said earlier also that it is yoga. It is yoga, but then yoga therapy is this other skill set other than just sharing and teaching people how to use yoga to heal themselves, because you said you're not fixing anybody, right? Mm-hmm. So the skill set that you're talking about that makes you yoga therapy, That is the question. Like, what is the skill set? So as we were talking about earlier, studying more biomedical learning, studying more anatomy and physiology doesn't inherently mean that you're more equipped. Right?
No, of course not. And I never said that.
So what's the skill set? So let's just say someone who doesn't go to a yoga therapy program per se, but as a yoga teacher, they want to become more educated about what they're doing. And they, like yourself, go to different conferences or they read different books and they meet people who know more than them and learn from them. And they develop new understandings that help better equip them to do what you said, facilitate recovery or help people meet their needs so that they could be well. So at some point, where along that progression in that person's learning did they go from being just this yoga teacher to being the yoga therapist?
Right.
Like
Where's
the threshold? Where does that happen? And what some people need, like some skill sets, like some learning helps people become more effective and some doesn't. Like just because everybody learns the same stuff doesn't mean they will be equally as effective.
Yeah,
because
absolutely.
There is this art element, as you're saying.
Yeah. And that's the same in any profession. Right. You're going to have some even licensed healthcare practitioners that, there's different levels of understanding and learning and competency. And that's a good point. So maybe just getting stuck, like I said, getting stuck on that label. I don't know how. I think though the value in.
If you are hearing this message, then you're listening to the free version of Jay Brown Yoga Talks. To hear the rest of our conversation, please subscribe to Podcast Premium at jbrownyoga.com/premium.